confirmation hearings for Ketanji Brown Jackson took a shocking turn yesterday when Republicans made the bold and controversial decision to ask the judge about her resume and her judicial philosophy, her rulings, her fundamental beliefs. Breaking from recent tradition, they, for whatever reason, did not ask Jackson how many beers she drank in college, nor did they inspect her high school yearbook for potential vulgarities. Democrats claim that Jackson has been treated unfairly. One can only assume that this is what they mean. She's been treated like a judge seeking the highest judicial appointment in the land and not like an alleged criminal on trial by a kangaroo court. That's what essentially separates the way Republicans handle these sorts of things from the way Democrats handle them. But of course, it's already known ahead of time that any line of questioning directed at Jackson will be out of bounds and racist. At least any questioning outside of questions like, what's your favorite flavor of ice cream? And have you always been this wonderful? The left made that explicitly clear from the outset, though they didn't need to be explicit. This is how the game is played, according to the long-established rules. Yet, in spite of the inherent racism of demanding that a black woman explain herself when all she wants to do is become a Supreme Court justice, there is, based on her record and her worldview, quite a lot to explain. Many of the questions about Jackson and to her as well have focused, rightfully so, on her lengthy history of leniency towards child sex predators, especially people who consume child pornography, who are also child sex predators by definition. The RNC research account lists several cases where Jackson passed down a sentence significantly below federal sentencing guidelines. In fact, this is how she handled every child porn case she encountered, every single one. She passed down a sentence below federal guidelines. So, for example, in one case, a man who had images of 8-year-old children, pornographic images, was supposed to be sentenced to 10 years, according to the guidelines. She gave him 3 months. In another, a predator with 48 files of child porn on his computer was subject to 97 months in prison. Jackson cut that into a third, giving him 28. In still another case, a pervert who posted a pornographic image of a 5-year-old was given by Jackson the lowest possible sentence allowed by the law, just 60 months. Now, one thing you might take away from this is that the federal guidelines are far too lenient already. I see no reason why child porn users and distributors should not be given mandatory life sentences. This should be like a one strike and you're out kind of situation. These are not people we need in society. You do something like that, it should be, okay, we don't need you in society. You're gone and you're never coming back. And yet, the soft guidelines were still not soft enough for Jackson, who seems to have a soft spot in her heart for child sex perverts. Now, what can she say for herself to justify this? Well, to explain at least one of these cases, she said that the lenient sentence was due in part to the child predator's diplomas and certificates. Listen.
He presented all of his diplomas and certificates and the things that he had done and argued, consistent with what I was seeing in the record, that this particular defendant had gotten into this in a way that was, I thought, inconsistent with some of the other cases that I had seen. Part of what a judge is doing, as required by Congress, is thinking about this case, thinking about unwarranted sentencing disparities, that's in the statute, other cases, other determinations that a judge may have made about this. I don't remember in detail this particular case, but I do recall it being unusual.
Now, at another point, she argued that her lighter touch on this issue has sometimes been due to the disparities in the system and the fact that the federal guidelines for child porn sentencing were first established back when child porn users had to obtain images through the mail. And this, for some reason, is significant, and it means that sometimes the sentence should be lighter than the guidelines allow. Let's listen to that.
As you said, the guideline was based originally on a statutory scheme and on directives, specific directives by Congress at a time in which more serious child pornography offenders were identified based on the volume, based on the number of photographs that they received in the mail. And that made total sense before, when we didn't have the internet, when we didn't have distribution. But the way that the guideline is now structured, based on that set of circumstances, is leading to extreme disparities in the system because it's so easy for people to get volumes of this kind of material now by computers. So it's not doing the work of differentiating who is a more serious offender in the way that it used to. So the commission has taken that into account, and perhaps even more importantly, courts are adjusting their sentences in order to account for the changed circumstances. But it says nothing about the court's view of the seriousness of this offense.
So the argument is that punishing someone for each image they obtain was fair back when they had to have the images mailed to them. But now that it's so easy to get hundreds of images at once, it's not fair. That's the argument. And it's a very, very bad argument. And you know it's a bad argument because over on CNN, infamous public masturbator Jeffrey Toobin was agreeing with it. It seems that Toobin, having already displayed his tube on a Zoom call, is now incapable of experiencing any further shame or embarrassment. Either that or he enjoys it, the freak. Whatever his reasons, Toobin, with his hands suspiciously out of view, said this.
Can I just add one point about these kiddie porn cases? And this came up, I remember, when I was an assistant U.S. attorney back in the 90s, is that when those sentencing guidelines were written for those cases, this was a time when the people who committed these crimes would order individual photos and then get them usually through email, and then they would be sentenced based on the number of photos they possessed. This was all pre-internet. So once the internet came in and people got access to hundreds and then thousands of photos, the sentencing guidelines would reflect hundreds and then thousands of photos. Federal judges have been struggling with the issue of how do you create a fair system that was designed pre-internet, that was, yet you have to sentence people post-internet. And what I thought Chairman Durbin pointed out is that judges across the country, including Republican-appointed judges, have been saying, look, we can't apply the rules that were designed pre-internet for an internet society. And many judges have been giving somewhat less sentences as a result.
Now, far be it from me to get into an argument with the sort of man who doesn't wear pants to a work meeting, especially when the argument is about pornography. But, you know, I'm not convinced by this reasoning. If anything, it seems clear to me the sentences should be harsher now because of the ease of access. It's exactly the reason that they're calling for lighter sentences. That's why there should be harsher sentences, because it necessitates a greater level of deterrence. It means that we must make an even more drastic example out of each offender because of how easy this stuff is to obtain. The message from society should be, we find a file of child porn on your computer and you're done forever. Your life is over. Yet both Jackson and Toobin believe that the more that this crime proliferates, the more common it becomes, the less we should penalize it. Now, one might wish that this is about as weird as things would get, but Judge Jackson is, at bottom, a leftist. And that means that the moral bewilderment and intellectual incoherence goes much deeper. I mean, this is a woman who is tragically confused, not just about the concept of justice, already a troubling source of confusion for a judge, but also about the basic realities of life, including what life even is and when life begins. And as to that question, here was her answer. Listen.
When does life begin, in your opinion?
Senator, I don't know.
Now, there's, of course, no excuse for not being able to answer that question. The only sensible starting point for life is the moment when you come into existence as a distinct human entity, otherwise known as conception. Any other starting point that you might choose will be necessarily arbitrary. There's only one solid, firm, sensible starting point, which is conception. But here's the thing. If she really doesn't know when life begins, then that's all the more reason to be stridently pro-life and anti-abortion. Because by Jackson's own words, as far as she knows, abortion might well be the murder of human life. I mean, if she doesn't know when life begins, then she cannot say that abortion does not destroy human life. According to her, the abortion industry may well have murdered 60 million human lives since Roe v. Wade. Now, I know for a fact, not that it may well have murdered 60 million human lives, but that it did. But you don't even need, in order to get to the pro-life, anti-abortion conclusion, you don't even need to go that far. The maybe, the might, the I don't know, if you're a rational and moral person, that should be enough to get you to the anti-abortion conclusion. Because if it's possible, if it's even possible that this mass genocide is happening, if it's a 50-50 toss-up, as she seems to think, then the only moral and defensible position to take is one of treating the unborn child as human life. To return to an analogy that I've made before, supporting abortion when you don't know when life begins, it's like tossing a live grenade into a room when you don't know if there's anybody in there or not. You know, it is at best morally incoherent to say, I don't know when life begins, but I support abortion anyway. Speaking of incoherent, nothing, of course, can top this.
Do you agree with Justice Ginsburg that there are physical differences between men and women that are enduring?
Senator, respectfully, I am not familiar with that particular quote or case,
Okay.
so it's hard for me to comment as to whether
all
or
right.
not.
I'd love to get your opinion on that, and you can submit that. Do you interpret Justice Ginsburg's meaning of men and women as male and female?
Again, because I don't know the case, I don't know how I interpret it. I need to read the whole
Okay.
thing. You know,
Can you provide a definition for the word woman?
can I provide a definition? No,
Yeah.
I can't.
You can't?
Not in
Okay.
this context.
So you
I'm not a
believe the
biologist.
meaning of the word woman is so unclear and controversial that you can't give me a definition?
Senator, in my work as a judge, what I do is I address disputes. If there's a dispute about a definition, people make arguments, and I look at the
All right.
law and I decide.
Yeah, I think we can officially now say that the What is a Woman movement has begun. When I started asking this question years ago, I honestly dreamed of a moment just like this, where someone like this is asked a question like that, very simple, in this sort of context. Because as we witnessed there, the whole house of cards comes tumbling down under the very meager weight of one extremely simple question. And the irony here is so rich, so grand, that it's almost impossible to fully appreciate and wrap your arms around. We've been breathlessly told that we should celebrate Jackson's nomination precisely because she's a black woman. But Jackson herself can't even tell us what a woman is. How can we celebrate the nomination of a woman if the people telling us to celebrate it can't define the word? So they say, celebrate her. Well, why? Because she's a woman, damn it. What's that? I don't know. Well, okay, then let me go get the champagne. Of course, Jackson's dodge is that she's not a biologist. But saying you can't define woman without a biology degree, it's like saying that you can't solve for 5 + 5 without a degree in mathematics. It's like saying you can't define the word car if you're not a mechanic, or fish if you're not a marine biologist. It's like saying you have to be a world-class artist to explain what a crayon is. This is all a bunch of unintelligible, irrational, rambling nonsense. Now, is the fact that Jackson doesn't know what a woman is relevant to her job? Well, yes. I would think it's quite relevant to a Supreme Court justice and their job to know whether they have a basic grasp on reality. And it's relevant for another reason. Because we all know that obviously she knows what a woman is. She knows the answer to the question. She's not that stupid. I mean, if she doesn't know, then she is, without a doubt, the dumbest Supreme Court nominee in the history of the United States. She is the dumbest person to ever even be considered for the job and should be disqualified on those grounds alone. But I'm going to give her more credit than that. I don't think she's nearly that stupid. There's no way that she could make it as far as she has being that stupid. So no, she knows what a woman is. She knows today. She's always known. She'll know tomorrow. But she's so beholden to left-wing orthodoxy, so firmly embedded in that world, so committed to it, that she will pretend she doesn't know, humiliating herself on the national stage in the process. That's what makes her dangerous on the Supreme Court. And yet this question, as I've been insisting for years, is the question that single-handedly destroys gender ideology and reveals leftism for what it is. And what is it? It's a movement of moral and intellectual chaos. It rejects truth categorically. It's a form of madness, ideological madness, madness that you choose to buy into and adopt as your worldview. Lunacy turned into a worldview is what leftism is. But most of all, it's flimsy. It's hollow at its core. Defeated by the most basic line of inquiry. Destroyed by questions. Questions that we just have to have the guts to ask. Well, I hope you enjoyed that clip from the Matt Walsh Show. If you did, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right down there so you can stay up to date on all of our future content.